Hi YouTubers, welcome back to another episode of Malcontent Corner, the corner where I hope to enlighten your lives by sharing with you things I've learned in the daily walk of mine. In today's episode, it finally happened. I screwed up. Tell you about it after the intro. So, what happened? What happened? I screwed up. As I said, I made a mistake. Rookie error. I don't know. I'm human. Very flawed, too. So, if you watched any of my previous videos, you know that I've talked about doing a timing belt on my Chrysler JXI convertible, my Chrysler Sebring. It's equipped with the 2.5 liter Mitsubishi engine. And I did a timing belt on it. Now, I didn't do a video on that because the work is very fiddly, very time consuming. Never done a timing belt before. First time for me. First time, probably the worst car in the world to try to do it on. I know there's some mechanics out there who will probably say, nah, that's nothing. That's a piece of cake. But let's just put it this way. It was a pain in the butt. There's not a lot of room in there, and you basically got to dismantle everything on the passenger side of the engine to get to what you need to get to. Now, the process of doing that, I did do some smart things, right? I replaced the timing belt, check. Replaced the hydraulic tensioner to keep the timing belt tight, check. Replaced the water pump. I was real leery about that one because the water pump is driven by the timing belt. Obviously, I didn't want to develop a water pump leak, so I replaced that. But the one thing I did not replace, because honestly, I didn't even think about it, the cam seals. That's right, I didn't do the cam seals. And that came back to haunt me in a bad way. Car was running great, put a couple thousand miles on it. I went to drive off one day, fired it up. As I'm backing out, I noticed there's a puddle where the car was. Like, well, that's kind of weird. So I went up, ran my finger through it, it was motor oil. Oh crap, what the hell went wrong? I had no idea. So I was thinking maybe, maybe the oil filter got a little loose on there. I don't know. Maybe the oil pressure sending unit was leaking on it. I mean, I've had that happen before on engines, right? The oil pressure sending unit went bad. But I looked underneath there, and the bottom of the car was coated. I checked the dipstick. Car was down about 2 quarts of oil. Fortunately, I didn't do any damage, but could have. But I noticed it early enough. But I think I lost the oil in the course of about 2 days. So there was another oil puddle out there somewhere that I did not see. Long story short, I ended up checking it. I couldn't figure out where the leak was, but it was certainly there. And I thought, well, is it coming from underneath the timing cover? I mean, could it be? Is it a cam seal? Nah, it can't be. Well, the cam covers on these engines are pretty well captured, but you can pull the cover off of the very front bank from the front of the car, which would be, if you're looking at the engine from the passenger side, the right bank, the bank closest to the radiator. You can pull that cover off. So sure enough, I pulled it off, and well, it looked a little wet under there. Not necessarily on the cover itself. The cover was dry, but it looked a little wet. So I went through and I hit it with some brake clean and cleaned it up. And I fired up the engine, and sure enough, I could see oil wicking out and dripping down, wicking out and dripping down at a pretty decent rate. So at that point, I knew I had cam seal failure. Damn. Because in order to do that, it meant I had to tear everything back apart again. Everything. I had basically had to approach the job like I was going to do a timing belt again. However, in doing that, I at least was a little easier because I knew what I was in for, and I took my sweet time on it. But I am going to cover here a couple of the tools that I used. I'm not saying you need them. I'm not saying you should have them. There is one tool you should probably have. I will get into that. But there are some tools that I use to help me facilitate this job. I'm going to describe them for you here, why I use them, how I use them, and so forth. Coming up next. Tools, tools, tools. Who doesn't love tools? I love tools. One of the things that I like about being a little older and being more financially established is that I can buy tools. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily like buying specialty tools, but sometimes you just need them to do the job right. Now, any specialty tools that I'm going to mention here, I will put in the description. And I'm not going to go through all the ins and outs of doing the timing belt on this car. I'll put a link in there for a couple of websites, one on YouTube, a gentleman that did a lot of work on his Chrysler Sebring, and another gentleman who did a write-up on the web regarding the timing belt replacement on his car. But let's just put it this way. Doing a timing belt on one of these cars is probably one of the hardest timing belts you can do, at least in my opinion. Now, I don't have a lot of experience. This is the first time I've done one, and it was a nightmare. Well, not a nightmare, but a bear. Let's just put it that way. Now, long story short, if you're going to undertake a job like this, you need to know a little bit of history. These 2.5 liter Mitsubishi engines were made for Chrysler, which they used in the Sebring. They also used them in the Dodge Intrepid and a few other vehicles. The same architecture type engine is a 3 liter, which what Mitsubishi used in a lot of their vehicles as well. So I suspect the tools, the specialty tools that I'm showing you here, will probably apply across the architecture of the engine. But obviously I can't guarantee that, so do your own research, please. But one of the tools that you will definitely need to do this job looks like this little gem dandy right here. It's just a little block of steel, and it's got a couple dowel pins on there. That's all there is to it. Now you say, what the world do I need that for? Well, long story short is you need that to set the right belt tension. And what there is a hydraulic tensioner in there that looks a lot like this. And if you take a look, there's a hole here, and there's actually a hole in the body here. But when you get a new one, this is an OEM unit, but when you get a new one, it will probably come with a pin like this. And what that pin is going to do is push, this tensioner will be in the body of the tensioner itself, this plunger here. And this pin keeps that plunger in place. Do not pull this out until you have this plunger tensioner assembly in place in the car. But long story short is that plunger will push up against a swingable arm which holds an idler wheel on it. That idler wheel has a bolt hole that is offset, and what that does is that allows you to set the tension on the belt so that it is neither too loose nor too tight. You don't want it too loose, because if the belt slips and skips, you can end up with a destroyed engine, because these are an interference engine, meaning the pistons and valves will unceremoniously collide, and you can end up with broken valves, which then destroy cylinder heads, cylinder walls, pistons, the whole 9 yards. Obviously, you don't want it too tight, because at that point you're going to be putting a lot of undue stress on the belt, on the cam sprockets, and on the cam bosses themselves that hold the camshafts in place. And that's where this tool comes in. In this particular engine, the 2.5, I believe you're supposed to set the torque on this to about 33 inch-pounds. So it's not a lot of torque. But what you need to do is you need to put the torque on there and then tighten that bolt down. And unfortunately, that bolt is a righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, so you're pushing the wheel counterclockwise, the bolt is tightening clockwise, and you can end up with a belt that's too loose real easily. So you're kind of fighting that. What I ended up doing was snugging it down pretty well, but where I could really move it if I, with some force, got it to the right tension, tightened it, spun the engine around 2 times from the crankshaft position, and the reason why you do that is you need the cams to do a complete 360. Then you want to take this little pin here and slide it in and out. Again, you just want to be able to slide it in and out. If it's too tight, if you can't pull it out easily, you either have the belt too tight or too loose. But you want to get it to where there's no tension on this pin when you pull it out. So that's what this little tool itself is used for. Now, I went through and stripped down the entire front of the engine, or I should say the passenger side of the engine, removed the engine mount, removed the power steering pump, removed the power steering bracket, pulled off the timing covers, and then you got to get off the the harmonic balancer bolt. That is torqued to an insanely torque value of like 140 foot-pounds, something like that. So that can be a little bit of a nightmare. What I ended up doing was taking an accessory belt that I had replaced that I still have around, wrapping it around it, using a vice grip to get it tight, as tight as I can on that harmonic balancer, taking the other end, wrapping it around the air conditioning bracket, clamping that down, and then having that held in place and hitting that bolt with a 1/2-inch impact gun. It did eventually break torque for me, and I was able to pull that apart. So it's not an easy job, but once I got that done, then I had the problem of, well, what am I going to do to break the torque on the cam sprockets, right? You know, I mean, I don't want to try to use the leverage of the valves pushing up against the pistons. I looked at the repair manual itself. They say use a piece of flat stock, drill some holes in it, put some bolts in it, use that to hold the bracket or the sprockets in place as you use, you know, to break the breaker bar, to break the torque. Well, that's great. I don't have flat stock, and for me to find that would be a lot of work. So I went to our favorite jungle site, and I picked up this little tool right here. Here's what it looks like in case you want to see a picture of it. And it's pretty handy because, you know, it's got this adjustable arm here, and it's got these little pins here that'll go in the sprockets themselves. And I thought, okay, the reviews are mixed on it, but I'm going to try it. Well, sure enough, I went to try it, and I was pushing up against it, and I heard a snap, and the pin fell out. So that was kind of a bust. In looking at this tool itself, I mean, it's nicely powder coated. It's got this lovely handle, but I think they didn't weld here on the shoulders themselves. I think they just butt welded it, ground it flat, powder coated it, and sent it off to the races. It'll probably work for vehicles that have cam sprockets held on with lower torque values, but don't try this on these Mitsubishis. Plus, you know, this isn't really long, so you can't get a good amount of leverage on it. You know, so it really, for me, this was a bust. Now, I can probably fix this, and I probably will fix this. I'll grind this off and clean this up, put it back in, and probably go through and clean this one up and put a weld around the shoulders of these, and then maybe probably try to sell it on eBay. Yeah, that was a bust. So then the next question was, well, great, that didn't work. Do I have to go the bar stock way? Well, I did find a gentleman that had this problem. I wish I could give him credit because I can't find the information again. But long story short, what he ended up doing was taking an old timing belt like this. This was actually my new timing belt. I elected to replace it because at this point I didn't know if oil got on it from the dripping of the cam seals. So I was going to replace it anyways at this point. I'm like, I'm in it again. I'm not farting around with this. So basically I measured it at 15 inches, and it's just enough so that the ends will meet on the cam sprocket. I put some duct tape here on the end so that it would hold on the cam sprocket like that. Now the reason why I did that was I went out and bought a tool that I've never really used before, but actually would have been handy to have for using that the harmonic balancer. I bought a chain wrench. Yeah, this is a real handy little tool. It's got a foot with some teeth on it there. I was able to wrap this around the cam sprocket, making sure that this part here was not where the joints meet up here. Okay, you don't want the teeth right on this. You want them on a solid spot of this. But once I was able to get there, I was able to put some tension on there, broke out my brand new Titan 30-inch breaker bar. Ain't messing around with this one. Put it on there, held it, was able to manhandle it and just go pop, broke the torque. Once I was able to break the torque, the sprockets came off like no problem whatsoever. Now, my next concern was pulling the cam seals themselves. Some people put screws in them and yank them out that way. I decided to try my seal puller here. It's made by Lyle, and yeah, those cam seals came out like butter. They were easy. And part of the reason why they were easy is because they weren't put in fully. This is the third timing belt this car has had, the first one I've ever done. So other mechanics have been in on it. In looking at the Chrysler repair manual, they recommended 2 tool numbers, and I purchased one of them, which is this. It's a Miller tool. There's a bolt that comes in this, but basically it's a machine piece of tool that has a shoulder on it. And what this does is you put the cam seal on there, you put this on there, and you thread it down, and it will go until the shoulder here hits on the boss on the cylinder head. Once you've done that, your cam seal's in. You know it's in at the right depth, everything's good. Well, what happened was the previous mechanic put the cam seals in and tapped them in with a hammer so that they were flush with that boss. They weren't in the heads fully. When you look at that boss on the inside lip, it's actually beveled down a little bit. And in theory, what you need to do is get the front of the cam seal at the very bottom of that bevel. Approximately. That's at that point, it's at the right depth. So I did this on the back side, the cam closest to the firewall. It worked great, but I didn't think the problem through and realized that the snout on the very front side of the engine is longer. Duh. The cylinders are offset, so one will be shorter, one will be longer to make up the difference because the cylinder banks are like this. Well, guess what? I have the short one. If you have the long one, it'll probably work on both of them. The short one will only work on the back one. Not a problem. I got some PVC piping, and you could probably do the same thing. Get some PVC piping of the right size, basically cut it flush, make sure it's square, use a bolt with a big washer on there and use that. The main thing you want to make sure you do is that you have the front of the cam seal recessed a little bit. I don't have a measurement on this, but basically as long as the front of that cam seal is flush with the inside of that bevel, you're good. In my case, they were flush with the bosses themselves. The cam seals popped right out. Boink, boink. They were $10 for 2 of them. I think I got them from Rock Auto, Mopar, listed parts. Put them in. With the use of all these tools that I have here, I was able to put everything back together properly. I used the chain wrench so I could set the torque back to 65 foot-pounds on those cam sprocket bolts. Buttoned it all up, and voila. Off to the races I went. The car's been running. I've got about 2,000 miles on it so far, knock on wood, and it has not leaked a drop. So, job well done. So, next up, I'm going to do a final couple of thoughts here. Now, here's my number one thought, and here's where I screwed up. This is the first time I've ever done a timing belt on one of these. Not a cam jaw, but a timing belt. Never done a timing belt before in my life. Knowing now what I know now, if you're going to do a job like this, whether it's a hard job or an easy one, take a look at how hard it might be to replace those cam seals. If you're in there, in this case, you know, parts are a lot cheaper than time, and I didn't know what to look for. So in my case, I overlooked the cam seals. I was smart enough to do the water pump, so knock on wood. But don't try to cheap out on this and just do the timing belt to get you by. If you're going to really tear into one of these cars, just go ahead and replace all the parts that are in there that are impossible to get to unless you tear everything apart again. You know, it's just so much easier. So, you know, obviously this was a painful lesson for me because I had to revisit a job that I did a year ago in March. I mean, obviously I'm doing fine now. The car's running great, but just so you know, if you go to do a job like this, just replace the water pump, just replace the cam seals. If you have one of these, you can use what I use to break the torque on the sprocket bolts. You don't have to. You can get a piece of flat stock. You maybe have a special tool, but anyways, that's what I used in my case. Anyways, with that being said and done, that's what I have for you here in this episode of Malcontent Corner. As always, I hope you found something of use here. And if not, thank you for at least listening to me. As always, I hope to see you back again here in the not too distant future. So until that time, please take care of yourselves. Tell your loved ones how much you care about them. And as always, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. trying to do my part to become that YouTube influencer, right? Trying to leave my mark in the world. But I hope to see you back again here in the not too distant future. So until that time, take care. We'll see you later. Ciao.